And let's take the money that we've been spending on war over the last decade to rebuild America. Roads, bridges, schools. We do those things, not only is your future going to be bright, but America's future is going to be bright as well.
Well, that's true, but it's not quite as easy as the president makes it sound. The money, he's talking about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and most of the money for those wars was borrowed money. In fact, we borrow about almost 40 cents for every dollar that we spend. So therefore, if he's going to keep spending this money for infrastructure, schools and bridges and highways, we're going to have to borrow more, which just adds to the federal deficit. A little detail he didn't mention.
And I know he keeps saying, you wanted to take Detroit bankrupt. Well, the president took Detroit bankrupt. You took General Motors bankrupt. You took Chrysler bankrupt. So when you say that I wanted to take the auto industry bankrupt, you actually did. And I think it's important to know that that was a process that was necessary to get those companies back on their feet so they could start hiring more people. That was precisely what I recommended and ultimately what happened.
Well, that's not precisely what Governor Romney recommended. He talked about a regular bankruptcy proceeding, in which case private investors would have come in and forked over the money to help the car companies get back on their feet. In fact, there were no private investors that were interested in this. The government stepped in with a very elaborate mechanism that enabled this to happen. It was started by President Bush and it was finished by President Obama, but it is not at all the kind of thing that Governor Romney had recommended.
What I've also said is, for above $250,000, we can go back to the tax rates we had when Bill Clinton was president.
That's true on the surface, but when you dig a little deeper, it's not true. And the reason is there are two taxes that Obama got through Congress that he would stick with, and they both involve the health care law. One is a 3.8% surcharge on investments for households making over that $250,000, and another one is a higher tax on Medicare for the same group of people. So those taxes would not come down along with the others. So the richer people would still be paying a higher rate than they did with Clinton.
How about deductions? Because I'm going to bring rates down across the board for everybody, but I'm going to limit deductions and exemptions and credits, particularly for people at the high end, because I am not going to have people at the high end pay less than they're paying now.
That's what he always says. I mean, he talks about a 20% across-the-board cut, and some independent studies have said it's not possible to do that unless you kill so many tax loopholes that you would really affect the middle class. That would include like the loophole, the deduction for charitable giving, the loophole for mortgage deduction, a lot of other popular deductions that would be politically unfeasible. That's why Romney probably hasn't mentioned what loopholes he would close, because a lot of them are very popular, enjoyed by a lot of middle-income Americans. The president has suggested that this would result in a $5 trillion tax cut, and the president doesn't really have a basis for that either, except from some of these scholarly studies that say if you're going to really cut taxes by 20%, you'd have to come up with this $5 trillion to offset the impact. So that's where that comes from.